projects that will wind up that can wind up taking that energy and saving that energy and then selling it when the costs are more proper, things like nighttime and so on in summer. So the issue here is that there's a lot of moving going on in that part of the world. The next issue that I'll talk about for a few minutes is that there are different types of solar plants out there. There is as you guys probably are totally aware, there is for 5 megawatts and under, there is an expedited sort of program. You start getting into the bigger power plants that are 20 megs and 30 megs and larger. You wind up there are alternative ways of handling those, but ultimately you basically have fixed solar panels, and you have tracking systems. And so the trackers that are out there, they have X and Y trackers, which will follow the sun and the climate the months of the year, so that they will be at the right azimuth and collect as much power. So those cost a little bit more, but they use a little bit of electricity in order to wind up tracking. So there have been a lot of strides made where some of the projects that we're seeing have much greater output from the panels. We've seen probably 15-20% increase since we've been doing this as far as production from some of the panels. And ultimately there is one thing that you might want to look at is that the technology of these panels is constantly getting better. That being said, that also looks long term. That looks at obsolete. How long will it be before the current panels that you have become obsolete? From there, the other part of the equation is that where you're located is also known as a capacity factor. We sit back and look at how much the ability of the project has to wind up being able to utilize the light coming in from the sun. So that's calculated into the costs and how far the plant is located away from transmission lines, because they need to wind up having bigger transmission lines is another big concern. Figuring it's somewhere in the area, generally speaking, of $1 million a meg to wind up, or excuse me, $1 million a mile to wind up running to the higher voltage lines. Ultimately, placement becomes a big issue. You might sit back and say, well, we've got this great landfill out there and it'd be a great place for solar panels, and it would probably be. But the idea is that, again, it doesn't have access to the high tension lines and such. We've been hired by a lot of counties to wind up be utilized as expert witnesses when it comes to the valuations of these projects for a number of years. And recently, in the last 2 years, we have been somewhat involved as an advisory group to the New York State Assessors Association to analyze the state's model for tax assessment purposes. Now, that is different than what we're doing for IDAs. When we value these projects for IDAs, there may be a different agenda is to saying what's the value of the solar plants and to whom. So I guess at this point, I'll wind up, I'll go down that path for a few minutes. So the big disconnect that almost everybody has with solar panels, and so have I, well, in my career here, is to sit back and say that if solar panels are generally being developed for somewhere between $2 million and $3 million a megawatt, why then does the industry come back to the assessors and sit back and say that they're only worth $200,000 or $300,000 a megawatt? So the situation comes down. So there's a big disconnect between the model that that New York State has out there and the cost to wind up building these. Obviously, if somebody is going to build these solar projects, they have to be incentivized. So how do they make their money? So let's go down that path for a few minutes. Obviously, another obvious part of this is that sales of electricity is something that we can figure out and quantify pretty easily. We look at your location, we look at the type of panels, whether they're fixed or whether they wind up having, or they have a tracking system. We look at whether they have battery backups or battery storage or not. And then from there, we can calculate out what the expected sale of electricity to the ISO, to the New York State grid. We can calculate out what the value of the power plant itself, the solar panels, is based upon the electricity that produced. So you've heard me earlier say that they would not be built if they weren't incentivized. So right now, if we wind up looking at strictly the value of these panels, if you were going based on what they're selling electricity for, you're looking at an upside down situation. Okay, again, where is the money being made? So the money is being made based upon the tax credits and the ability to technically sell those tax credits or bring in more general partners or more limited partners. And then the issue is that the other place is that they can get grants. And other carbon credits. Each project is different. So some of the counties have reached out to us and said, can you give us just a cookie cutter dollar figure for a 5 megawatt plant? And the answer is, we probably could, but there's so many variables that we would probably be giving you some less than great numbers. I mean, the numbers can't be refined to the point because, again, you need to know what your market is in your area for power. You need to understand what so based on competitive supply and demand. You also wind up in the grid itself. You need to wind up knowing what are the panels fixed or are they are they static? And you need to know the output from the panels, and you need to know the capacity, whether the sun, how much the sun is shining in your area. So those are the key elements that we wind up needing, and that's why they're different for every project that we do. Also, the other part of this that's different for every project that we do is, where are they getting credits from? Are they getting the 30% tax credit? Are they, which they should be right now? Are they getting, if it were built today, are they getting any other incentives? And then ultimately, when we calculate out the value, and when I say value to whom, I sit back and say, if those solar panels were being sold today, what's being sold with them? If they were sold, is the land being sold? Is the land not being sold? Are the panels being sold and the electricity that produced, or are there the tax credits being sold, or any of the cash flows, maybe any incentives that are given to the project? So, for years before New York State came in and created a model for the assessors to wind up using, which is by far not a perfect model at all. It does not take in consideration tracking. We also feel that maybe it's pretty much at the very, very lowest end as far as the value goes of the scenario that we've seen. So we feel that the New York State's influence and their want to wind up having green power has sort of influenced the valuation part of their model for assessors. In other words, they're sort of incentivizing a lower tax break based on the model. Now, the model was put into place, and then from there it was taken. There was a lawsuit, so it is currently suspended and currently on hold. So the assessors have been coming up to me quite often saying, "How do we handle it at this point in time?" And that's again a not great idea, or not an easy question to answer. So that being said, when someone asks me if I can appraise a solar panel to them, or a solar panel project to them, my answer is absolutely. And then the question then becomes is, what do you want me to appraise? And that becomes the $50 question. Do you want me to appraise the tax credits? Because there's value in the tax credits. Do you want me to wind up appraising the incentives, or do you want me to wind up the value of the incentives, or do you want me to appraise just its ability to produce power? Now, even when we wind up looking at the value of all the incentives, and we wind up looking at the value of the tax credits, and we look at the value of the power that they produce, we still don't reach the dollar figure of what they cost to build. And why is that? Well, the reason that's the case is because they are getting investors to wind up investing in these developers, and they are building these plants, and they are riding to some extent on the investors' part of the portfolio. So I have given you probably, a 7-day course here in about 15 minutes or so. So the point, and I'm sure I probably left out a lot of holes for some of you, but I think at this point in time, everybody here in the room, the Zoom room, is probably coming in with a different level of understanding of the solar power projects. And so I tried to wind up giving you the mid-ground of solar panel valuation 101. If you want me to get more specific into, the panels themselves, I mean, I can tell you that they produce DC power, and they have to wind up being converted to AC power in order to put power back onto the grid. There's loss there. They also wind up having the inverters that don't last the length of the panels. The panels typically last 25 to 30 years. I've done some consulting work with New York State as far as with Cornell University, as far as the combination of agricultural and solar panels, how they can wind up working together. I've done I've been on some panels for that, so I can probably talk about that a little bit more. Again, the technology is moving quite a bit, including things like battery backup, where they wind up using arbitrage systems, where they wind up again creating the power technically when it's lower and selling it when it's higher, which gas companies have been doing for a lot of years. So there's a tremendous amount here on the table, and I'm not exactly sure where all of you guys are coming from, but Reen and I are your paid consultants. So, and we're because we're appraisers, we're objective, impartial, and independent. We do not have a game in the hunt. You're our client. Although many towns and many IDAs and many counties have hired us to have two clients. The developer pays us for the appraisal assignment, and we have the town or the county as a client, along with the developer. That way, when we do those projects, we have both of you as our client, and we can answer any questions to any of you at that point in time. So many contracts are put together that way. It's not uncommon that we might be paid by the developer, but both the county or the town are our client, and therefore we answer to both of them. So As appraisers, again, I'm an ethics instructor, a nationwide ethics instructor. So I believe, and Rena and I both wind up believing that our job is to be impartial, independent, objective, and so I guess that's kind of that's kind of a little story and a little background on us, a little background and a little bit of story on the case.
Can I jump in there and just with your statement you just made, a couple of comments. For us working on a policy level, it's now very evident that every solar project is different and every solar project has its various complexities. And that will help us as we deal with our policy on dealing with solar projects. Can you comment on the balancing act that IDAs have in not only dealing with the complexity, but the awareness that there are federal and state programs that also support these solar projects, and then the IDAs come in to look at local incentives and what you've seen as IDAs try to find the balance between making sure there's the right level of incentives to allow the project to go forward. Any comments on that balancing act the IDAs have?
So John, before you answer that, I want to slip in a question which you probably would weave into your answer. I think that one of the hardest things for us to understand being lay people in the solar world is they're getting investment tax credits of 30%, in this case, whatever it may be, $5 million. But realistically, explain to us how the solar project is benefiting from that. I mean, in some cases, they won't have enough appetite to use the $5 million. So as explained to me, I found this is a very complex way to do a loan.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, so let's start out and talk about, first, there is a website out there called DIS.org. I can reference it or send it to you guys a little bit later. But anyways, there is a listing right now, a nationwide listing of all the incentives that are currently available to for solar, and you can drill right down to your zip code and wind up looking at what's when they're made available, these grants and these low cost loans, all sorts of things that wind up bridge loans, things like that that play part in this that wind up that are available to these developers, because again, this industry is being incentivized, and whether you like solar power or dislike solar power, the powers to be have been using tax credits to sit back and wind up being able to push a goal that has been perceived to be in the community and the good, and therefore that's why those tax credits are out there. Now, the 30% tax credits, as you say, on a $5 million plant, one developer himself may not be able to wind up utilizing that direct tax credit and write off. How they can write it off is can be over a number of years, or could be over 1 year, which again then begs the question to the assessors in the room, if there's any assessors, is that considered a gift, or is that considered to actually be a cash flow? And that's a complicated question that kind of goes off on itself. But again, we come down to the tax credit. Tax credits, you can, as a general partner, you can bring in limited partners, and it's not uncommon for these solar projects to be built and the ownership changes on them several times within the first couple of years of owning. So again, the developers are generally interested in putting the project together, making their money up front, and then kind of letting other people handle it with their investors a little bit later on down the field. As far as all of those different types of incentives go, whether they're carbon credit based, whether they're whether they're just an outright grant, that which is then would be considered somewhat of a gift. They're all different. And again, to me, as an appraiser, they're all a way of they're all a cash flow of one way, of one form or another. In the government world, the questions of whether or not whether that income stream is taxable or not is another question. I don't know if I've answered your question properly. It's really hard to wind up without knowing specifics to sit back and wind up saying to you guys, the developers are usually the ones that are are the ones that are on top of getting the most amount of incentives for the projects that they find is most appealing to their investors. And again, they market them that way.
So in terms of what Carson, I think Carson can correct me if I'm wrong, but their model is to build a project and keep the project. They're not interested in selling off. What? Ask them, please.
Hey, John, Mike Wild, I have some background in wind. So I do know a little bit about the fact that you have private equity or investment bankers that will come in and help finance $100 million projects and be out within 2 or 3 years because they've taken these tax credits and their money is made back and they end up just selling these projects at a reduced rate for someone to go forward with and move forward.
I think we need to get Garson on the line to say what their model is.
Well,
CBE.
Each one is different, right?
Yeah, it is, and just to clarify, with CBE in their application, they say they're gonna own for 25 years or more. So they are expecting to buy the land and continue to operate. That's just for that particular application.
Yeah, I'm not talking about specifics, right?
Yeah, which is unusual, by the way. I mean, just so you know. So we see.
My own opinion, I'm not sure that's gonna happen. Carson may stick around, but the big money is gonna be there and then be gone, and they're gonna make their money. Carson's gonna have a long-term kind of annuity, so to speak. But I'm really curious about, from my own perspective, I know that these tax credits and incentives are there. In my experience with wind, they started out really strong and then they were reduced over time.
Hello?
Same's happening with solar. There's something called block grants, I think, in terms of money they get from incentives in terms of producing the green power or solar power that have reduced over time. So I'm curious, how do other IDAs address this? Because my own personal opinion, there's enough investment credits and tax credits going around that they don't really need this. And I'm just curious what your sense is and what you're seeing around the state and around the country with this kind of these projects.
Well, I mean, again, they're selling the stuff off to their investors. So the lowest cost, when they can get the assessors to wind up coming up with a lower model, that helps their bottom line and their projections. Same with the same with any types of tax credits that they wind up getting through IDAs. So the issue there is that ultimately they're in some ways looking at that for added incentive and added profit lines. Your first part of the whole situation, I've been involved a lot with tax credit properties, not only with solar and wind, but also with properties that are subsidized housing. And the banks generally are falling over themselves to wind up being able to do bridge loans to finance these things because they know their money is very, very secure. And also they generally wind up getting CRA credits, Community Reinvestment Act credits, for doing such. So since banks and lending institutions are looking for CRA credits, this is one way of them to wind up being able to loan, be comfortable, and bridge loan and get CRA credits. Now, I've not heard of banks getting CRA credits for solar power, but I don't doubt that that's entirely possible.
John, John, can I jump in here for a moment? A couple things. First, John made reference to where you can find all these incentives, and it's at a website called DSIREUSA.com. And it's through the University of North Carolina State, actually, not the University of North Carolina. But they list all the incentives. The tax, if you look at the model, and I've looked at the model. The model shows that the cash flows are going to produce somewhere in the vicinity of $3.1, $3.2 million. That's the value. You have an upfront cost of $17.5 million to build this. You have the land acquisition and another $300,000, $360,000. So the total upfront cost is almost $18 million. So those credits, whether they're done by NYSERDA or they're the community adder or they're the tax credits, fill the gap to make these at least worthwhile for a developer to go in and take the risk. And there is significant risk in this. One of the things that happens in this industry is that your natural gas price, electricity tracks that pretty closely. So when the price of gas is going up, so is the price of electricity. If you've checked your bill lately, last few months, it's probably much higher than it was last winter. So again, some of these incentives help fill the gap for the risk or cover the risk that these developers are taking. And the risk is significant. Probably a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, they were selling electricity, let's say for the sake of argument, at 2 cents a kilowatt. And right now that price is probably tripled over the past year. And if you track this over a 10 or 20 year period, this doesn't go up like like eggs or the price of bread or anything like that, where you can put an inflation factor in, because they go up and down, based on gas prices. So these incentives are there to help cover that risk and at least help the state reach the goal of using solar. Now, whether solar is going to be a technology, into the future and a good technology, nobody knows at this point. But
Okay, one more for me. And so, gentlemen, I was just curious, do you have any data that might indicate what solar developments have occurred that have not received any IDA incentives?
Oh yeah. There's actually. Do I have data the percentage wise? I can only go by the number of projects that we've done. So I don't know, Reen, would you say that a good number of projects, 50% of the projects that we've completed were non-IDA?
oh, at least, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
But the question is that, as we talked a little bit yesterday with reading, is that there is a big difference between a community solar project and a 20 megawatt and above project. And also probably deciphering that if it's even a small solar project, it's not community-based project. How's the comparison between those three? Which one is more apt to need incentives to get them going up and running?
That's kind of a tricky question. Well, let's first at least describe a little bit about community solar panels. Okay, in theory, the community solar panel projects are projects that go out to the public, and the public has the ability to wind up being able to choose the power that they're getting. Now, they don't really get a choice of whether their electrons wind up coming from their, from what source or what power. But by adding solar power to the grid, theoretically, they're putting their money towards being green. So in one format or another, the community solar projects generally wind up, the only real difference technologically that I'm aware of, Reen can probably jump in a little bit more on this, but is that there's just a slightly different additional management cost for them involving themselves in the community ownership. Other than that, the projects are labeled as such to wind up being more of a fast track way of getting them approved and online. Reen, you want to jump in on any of that?
Yeah, I think the bigger projects, and by bigger, I'm talking about our experience is 20 megawatts and above. And those projects are selling their electricity to New York State ISO, and the independent system operator basically on a daily basis, they bid the electric generators, all types of generators, whether it's nuclear or gas or solar, are bidding in on a daily basis. And then there's a priority list that ISO produces, and they distribute electricity. With and so the management of those projects tends to be somewhat less intensive than the smaller projects. And the smaller projects are more intensive because, and you could see in the application that they made, they're going to benefit 800 to 1,000 homeowners with 10% reduced electric prices. Within that, the management's more intensive because of the turnover. It's like subscriptions. You get a subscription for a year, and maybe you don't think you're getting a good deal, and you don't renew. So there is turnover in those 800 or 1,000 people that are looking at those those electric rates. So it tends to be more intensive from a management standpoint with the turnover.
A couple of things too that we haven't talked about that can also play a part in your project is that there's a PPA involved, which caps the price of electricity. So if let's just say a college decides that they want to solar, and they might go off-site for a solar plant and have a solar plant built, they might buy power at a certain dollar figure for helping to finance or fund the project, or even just on an agreement basis. Long term, that steadies out the cash flow of the project, where they're not relying upon the fluctuations of the market that Reen was talking about. So where Reen's talking about the risk factors is in the bigger plants, they're bidding in against everyone else. But the risk is being mitigated overall somewhat by the fact that the government's plan is to phase out a lot of the older plants in New York State, and therefore the risk on solar is overall, generally speaking, is less. But when you have a solar project that has a PPA where a power purchase agreement is involved, that's what PPA stands for. You're committing to a steady cash flow.
So, John and Rini, question for you. The comment earlier about some solar projects being launched without IDA incentives. That certainly makes sense because as we've learned, every project is different. On the flip side of that, have you been working or seen projects that have been gone to the development stage but did not go further because there were not enough incentives?
I think that's a tougher question to answer, just because we typically see the projects once. One methodology here would be the developer is negotiating directly with the assessor on the assessment of the project, and then they're taxed accordingly. The second methodology is the one you're involved with a PPA. So we tend to see these projects once they get to some sort of comfort level where they're asking us to value these cash flows, whatever they may be, and they've already got partial approvals through the town, through either the planning board or the zoning board. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, I think a little history here. About 10 years, and I know my timeline is not right on here, but about 10 years ago, the federal tax credit was 30%, and that is the heaviest hitter of all of the incentives. And from there, you wound up, it went down, it was reduced to 25 and then to 20. And I think that there was less of these plants being built at that point in time. And now we're back up to the 30 again, and we seem to wind up being at another bigger push. And also I think that the state model kind of helped the developers a little bit too, because it is really really at the very, very low. It's almost at the cost of the sale of electricity all by itself. Would you agree with that, Ree?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I noticed in the governor's budget, they are re-blessing the state solar appraisal model. And if I remember some of the numbers that I've seen on this, they are really, really lowball in terms of what the true value is. I mean, we're talking about, I think it was 400,000 megawatt, was somewhere around there. Was that my right recollection, Renee? Where, compared to full valuation, which some of the schools are looking for, no relief from the school taxes. When you look at those numbers, that's quite a difference. I mean, it's probably about, I'm just rough guessing, 20% or 25% of what a full assessment model would be.
Well, that's where you're, that's where you're going from a standpoint. For many years, we were providing our clients with basically three separate values. We were providing the value of the sale of the power from the plant all by itself. In other words, you had a plant sitting there, a solar power plant, generating electricity. What do you think it's going to, if I sold it to somebody where I was just getting the production of power, that would be the very, very lowest dollar figure, because again, that's strictly based upon production. And if you were buying that, you wouldn't pay any more than expecting a return on your investment based on the cash flows coming from it. Now the question then becomes is that would I pay more if I got a tax credit that I could use? And the issue is that the answer is yes. Well, then it's worth more to you. And then if I got grants and was able to write off depreciation and things like that, would I pay more for it? And the answer is yes. So we were providing our clients, and still in some cases still providing some of our IDAs, a multiple tiered approach, and that is that what's the value including all of the incentives, what's the value including only the federal tax credit, what's the value including just the value of the cash flows. So now you've gotten three different. So if it costs $2 million a megawatt, and which is pretty economical, and our numbers might fluctuate from our values might be fluctuating from 1.7 for the whole enchilada down to maybe 1.2 with the federal tax credits, or 1.3, and then down to a $1 million value based upon the or around 50% based upon the sale of the electricity alone and the projections based upon that. So again, these are extremely rough numbers, totally completely different. Different projects have all different numbers, but the reality here is that there is what you pay for, or what the value of this project is, depends on what you're putting into the model, and that comes back to my question of what am I valuing to whom, and obviously the banks, they're willing to finance the whole enchilada. If it costs $2 million to build per megawatt, the issue here is that they're going to do a bridge loan and get that paid back off relatively short period, and they're taking in consideration everything, where we're sitting back and looking at what we're asked to value. And the shortcomings of that is that if I gave you guys, everybody sitting there at the meeting today, a report that said that your plant was worth a low of 15 million and a high of 25 million, you'd be sitting back saying to me, why is there such a big difference? And so now I kind of clarified that and explained to you why the difference is what would be transferred. The developers are saying that we should not consider tax credits and we should not be considered incentives, because they're saying that's a gift, okay, to the project. And you should only value it based upon the cash flows. And that's why the state's model kind of agrees with that and says the value of the power plant, solar power plant, is only the value of the cash flows that it produces, plus a couple of minor items.
So one question is that, do you foresee the state mandating a model for assessment? I mean, right now it's all over the board.
I'm sorry, Dave, ask that question again.
So you see the state mandating an assessment model for solar projects. I mean, right now, your local assessor may have one value. The state values have different values, different appraisers might have, assessors might have other different values. You think the state trying to standardize this because they want to?
Right.
Yes, the state is trying to standardize it, and the state came in their old model. The problem with their model was flawed. And when they came out with their original model, the first iteration, they brought it to our attention. We sat in a meeting with it before it was approved. And basically it looked like a pretty good model. And I kind of chuckled a little bit and I said, boy, you're going to get everybody pissed off at you. And they said, this is a direct conversation to the state. And they said, and I go, which I think is the right thing. And they sit back and they said, and then they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I go, you're coming in lower than the assessors would like to see for based upon what they think these properties are worth, but you're coming in much higher than what the developers are looking for. And so you'll get both sides of them upset with you. And then the state sat back and about 2 weeks later came in with a totally different model, which basically put it much, much closer to where the developers really wanted it to be.
Well, thank you, Rini and John.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, can I ask one more question real quick?
You may.
Sorry, thank you. John and Rini, given just seeking some final words of advice, we have a situation where we know every solar project is different. We know IDAs have treated projects very differently. We know the landscape at the state level is very different, has different fluid issues going on right now. Any words of advice for us and as we deal with this particular application?
Yeah, I think so. Well, the particular application I have to defer to Reed, but with other applications that we have looked at that have gone IDA, I feel the best product for you is to wind up looking at the 3-value product, because that allows you leverage to negotiate between pretty much where the assessor's model comes in at and the value that includes all the value of all the incentives, but does not include the additional value that's provided by their investment portfolio. So, which would be the business value and the assessor, and that can't be valued in this for assessment purposes. So the reality then is that that if you get the three separate numbers where it's to your advantage is to sit back and say, we have an expert on staff that's done this, and this is the appraisal report. Now, can we negotiate this pilot? And then you've got the range of values to wind up to look at to determine a final number. I'd like to tell you exactly what the final number should be, but the reality is I don't think anybody can. And that's what makes this very, very difficult. There is a huge disparity between what the property's worth based on the cash flows and worth what they cost to build. So the value is based upon who at what time. And again, the state is deferred with the assessor's model to be on the lowest end of it, just basically on the cash flows. Reen, do you have anything specific to say about the project itself?
Yeah, I think for the IDA, and Chuck, you have a sort of a finance background, is if you want to see where all this money is going and what is where your balance is, ask the developer for a net present value of the project. Where are all these? How do all these incentives fit in with all the expenses and all the costs to say that the net present value of this project is a positive number or it's a negative number?
Now, there was one other question too that Reen brought to my attention, and maybe it's a different project here, but it might be this project. So Reen, you said to me at one point in time, a week or two ago, that the projections that the developer gave for the capacity factors or the generation factors was anomalously high.
It was not on this project, John. It
I'm
wasn't
sorry.
on this project. It might be a little high, but they were more conservative with their on the pricing model.
Okay.
So it sort of balanced out here.
I'm
How
sorry.
about a quickie question?
Mhm.
Or a couple of quickie questions, if I may, David? Dave?
Yeah.
Okay. How long has your company been in this business?
34 years.
Yeah.
How many?
34 years.
Yeah, I've been in it 41, 42 now. And our company's been in it for 34.
I hate to be funny about this, but I think what we should do is we should buy stock in your business since you work both sides of the fence. How do we work? How does an IDA? It seems to me that with your experience of all this time and things changing, panels constantly getting better and all that kind of stuff, you have all of the knowledge. We are a PR and salesperson. Is that what's happening with other IDAs?
Oh, wow. Well, big questions. Well, first off, to sit back and say, yes, we do work for, we have a product to sell. Our product is our independence, our objective. And therefore we don't provide different numbers to different people. Although I can tell you that there are times where the developers will tell us, make sure that you only give us the values of the cash flows and not the values of the tax credits. So we'll prepare a report that way, but we will caveat the report so that if anybody reads it, to sit back and say, we did not take those things into consideration, just so you understand. So the point being is that we don't provide different numbers to different people. They're the same numbers, and that based on that project.
No,
Second,
I didn't mean different numbers. You said earlier on
I know,
that you wind up working for both sides of the fence. I was being little.
No, I totally get it. I totally get it, and that's what actually that's something to protect yourself as a group. That if you do hire us. Or if the developer hires us or the developer pays for us, which in many cases that's what happens, make sure that you're the client with the developer so that I can talk to you about everything.
So as a business contract, the IDAs are your marketing and salespeople out in the field, right? We can't possibly come up to the level of your knowledge in the 34 years that you're in. So we are the front people for you, right? And
Yeah,
we expect, huh?
You could say that, yeah.
I think it sounds that way to me. And by the way, I have to tell you that my name is harder to
Yeah,
pronounce
move on.
than either one of your names.
Let's move on. Thanks, Reedy and John.
Let me just point out just one quick thing, Mr. Chairman. There's been information requested CVE. We'll get the additional information. We'll continue working with Greenie and John. So more to come. So I just want to make sure the board's
Well,
aware of that.
I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity. I'm always available for you. Reen and I are available to talk to you at any time. The issue here is that, and I hope that what we provided you didn't make the waters muddier, but cleared a few things up. So it was nice talking to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Have a
I'm
good
gonna,
day.
I'm gonna leave the meeting then. See ya. Have a good day.
Next item of business, Canal Side Master Plan update. Dan, you want to cover that?
A little bit about it. We signed the technical services change order number 4 with development after review and discussion, et cetera. So we're moving along on that. The project engineer, project manager, but Paul Gay is scheduling bi-weekly meetings. We had one on February 1, was a pretty good meeting. Next one is February 15th, 1:30 p.m. And the one subsequent to that is March 1st and 15th. At the February 1st meeting, we discussed a bunch of things, but I'll touch on a couple. We discussed having a community informational meeting at some time, maybe in April, so that people out there, so to speak, are aware of what's going on in the canal side. We got that executed copy of the service change order, and Paul will develop an editable Gantt chart, so take a look at that down the road. They are proceeding with the separation project. That would be separation of 400,000 gallons of stormwater from the sewage, so that we can get 100,000 gallons of capacity, and that's what the transmission line is designed at this point. And they have identified with the sewer district possible projects that will accomplish that goal. And we need to coordinate that with Little Hudson Falls and the EPC. And Dr. Bob, Dave, and I were at that meeting, so I don't know if you have anything else.
The only thing I'll add is that there's a wide variety of participation, not only the IDA and from Jared Engineering, but we also obviously have Labella. We have the Washington County Sewer District. We have a Lake George, Lake Champlain Regional Planning Board. We have the Village of Port Edward that just recently added the town of Port Edward. So really a good working group.
Any questions for?
The only other thing that I had on here is just came up subsequent to the meeting. I posed a question to Labella on when are they going to be implementing their monitoring on the water and sewer side? Because we learned after the meeting from Jason Deno that they have not approached the sewer district officially yet on where and when and how they want to do the monitoring. So I think that's one of the things we want to push, because I can see that really, in my opinion, should be starting here at the end of the month.
Right.
And that's going to be a March, April timeframe, which is going to be typically the best time of year, worst time of year to be doing the monitoring, because we're going to be seeing the peak flow due to the inflow and infiltration of stormwater.
Jason Deno, the director, Washington County. So,
Yeah, and then I know the other part, the IDA, and I guess, Dave, you mentioned after the meeting that you're UWIP, what I never remember your acronyms, but I think sooner rather than later, the IDA should be having some of the direct conversation with the sewer district as far as buy-in and shared costs when it comes to the separation project.
Right.
I think that's something we want to get out on the table. Maybe it's buy-in associated with whatever it was, and without potential.
The goal here with all of this stuff is to complete this, all of this efforts by September, right? Because the grant is funding this will expire at that point.
Second thing was that, we got executed contracts from, HUD for the other $950,000. We can start spending administrative money on that. So we're looking at that as far as where we're going for, the second part of the year. There's potentially a couple other areas we're looking for grants to help out with this area too, so. More to come on that later. I got an email from Coates today, who's the broker for CHPD. They will be taking up residency at the site effective March 1st, so we can start charging rent on that project. That was a contract we signed 4, 5, 6 months ago, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, so that's coming into effect.
That's one of the key.
Just to be clear, the CHPD, there's a different thing that they were looking at. Was that, and Chuck could put in on that, they were looking at another building in the area, so. Chuck.
Yeah, there's two issues going on with the whole CHPD project. There's laydown, and that's the lease that Chairman was referring to. That will start, activity will start on March 1st. They've been visiting the site and doing all their planning.
Yeah.
There is another group that was associated with Hewlett Mobile Maintenance that was looking at our 41,000 foot building and space around it. We got notified yesterday they are no longer interested in that space. However, they might be interested in other outside space at the site, so we're waiting to hear back from them. So that's where we are with those two leasing opportunities.
So I interpret it a little bit differently. They're not ready to fully figured yet. What I got of it, they may in the future, but they're sort of in limbo. And the only consistent thing I found with Hewitt is their inconsistency. Yeah. So we'll see. Okay, anything else?
Where are we going with solar, Dave?
Where are we going? Well, we still have to digest it and go with the application, analyze the application, go from there.
I just have a thought.
Appraisal on that.
Pardon?
The appraisal
It's $5,000 cost.
can be borne by the client.
Well, you'll have to agree to that.
Doesn't get it filed. I mean, we don't consider it application. That needs to be a factor in all of these. If you ask me, there's a 3-pronged approach
Yeah.
to their appraisals that, we're not the experts.
No.
They are, and they'll go between the town assessor and developer, and like they said, come to a happy medium number. If they don't, they don't,
But it's common practice to do that. What you're talking.
That's why I went, Dave, a little far apart there. We have to pay them X amount of dollars to be there. Maybe we should get the money as the person who is bringing in the job, that we can't do it without them. They can do it without us. We just have to know where it is.
Municipality, et cetera, it undertakes, or is looking at a project that requires a traffic study, this, that, those costs are to be borne by the developer, the.
Yes.
That record, what happened, so that's.
Just to be clear with the board, we've been authorized to do the consulting agreement for 3,500. The appraisal is 5,000. I don't think it's an additional 5,000. I think it's, we could, if the board so inclined, up the service level to the appraisal, but we haven't done so thus far. Just want to make sure everyone's aware of that.
So I have just a thought. The towns may severely object to this. Somehow, I'm not sure how Warren County feels. But we heard today that over 50% of these projects go forward without by the incentives. And the conflict is how do they get to the point where they can get some, the towns can get some revenue without the people with the project coming back and dealing with taxes. And that's one of the benefits of IDA pilot, right? So there's some sense of return. But I'm almost thinking that this should be pushed to the towns and not the IDA to make a decision in terms of whether or not some incentives should be given. I know we have the authority to do that, but at the same time, we're here representing Warren, Washington County and the towns that are part of that. And I'm just wondering if we should just step back from solar and let the towns work it out.
Well, remember, it's not only the town, but the county and the school.
I agree.
Yes.
Three entities,
Yes.
the complexity, the three entities where we can handle it perhaps across the board.
Then maybe we should be going back to our towns and schools in the county and say, what would you like us to do? We can walk away and you can do this. And or we could come up with some generic form that everybody agrees to. I think evaluating each one individually, although there's consultants that have a methodology to make that happen, is just going to bog it down even more so. Make these decisions. The state's pushing stuff down on us. I have a big problem with the state saying, you guys have to be the bad guy with us also to help these solar projects happen.
Here's the thing, well, this has really nothing to do with us. I'm really amused and being kind. The state pushing this, as they said, the only way these things, the only reason it's successful is because they're subsidized with your money. And we're going to take offline natural gas, coal, oil, whatever, fossil fuel plants that don't require subsidy. So that's really easy.
Conflicted. I'm not sure I want to support going forward.
Well, again, one thing we're learning is every project different, and a reminder with CVE. It's a site that's not very developable. It has wetlands, it's next to airport, there are height restrictions. It's also a location where people can't see it, and that's a complaint a lot of times with solar farms. So there's things about this project that make it attractive or less disruptive versus other solar projects. So I would suggest that, we continue working through this. We'll learn a lot, we already have, and let us staff come forward with consultants with our finding statement and our recommendation for consideration.
Which is what does everybody think? Everybody thinks good idea, good sense.
No, not particularly.
I understand on my basis, I think that, on an overall basis, no. I think this project has some unique characteristics that other projects don't, and we may want to consider this one. One is a piece of property that's out there, been sold for $750,000 and marginal usage, it's been there for years.
So it would be part of our policy that only under certain circumstances that we have to define. Will we do solar pilots?
I think that's good. And your approach, I like that, and I also like that we set some standards, if you will, if that's possible. Because as they said, we're different, but we can have standards. If you need this, and this, okay, we'll consider it. But absent those.
I mean, I don't, personally, I don't think we've blown the 20 and above, because that's just
Oh, no, it's
entirely different.
you need a five. And I was listening to something, I listened to a bunch of podcasts on interesting stuff. But they didn't care. But they were talking about energy generation. And that solar is actually becoming much more financially appealing than wind. Because of the incentives. The wind had huge ones, and like you may have heard me say earlier on this meeting, when I was with wind, those federal tax credits and other credits went down every year. They were still putting $100 million right in the ground. These guys were walking on in 3 minutes. With their money, they made their money then. Venture capital. And especially with the expense. But Dan and I were chatting that, you know, a property is only worth what someone's willing to pay for it. So it's almost like it's in the state formula. And don't give them incentive.
What's that? We're not doing it. Kind of, when someone says, how many don't go forward? Is that the question? Without IDA, something.
This group has stated they will come forward. They have other investment opportunities, and this one will be too risky.
They're gonna say, this is a pirate game, this is a poker game, they're gonna say that. They're gonna tell you, oh, please, you don't give us stuff, we're out of here. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
If there's 3 members of the board here, 4 members of the board here. We have to make a decision on that because much as 5 here, I forgot half base up there. Your party's blocked. So, I mean, that's not something I strictly up to the board. I don't know if we made that decision today, but I'm not willing to invest money for something the board doesn't want to do.
And, you know, it's tough. If we're gonna say, no, we're not gonna do this. If we're gonna ask this guy to spend $5,000, give us an evaluation. So I would be really upset if we came back and said, well, no, we're not gonna offer any benefits. And just,
Well, we're just.
We do quotes for free all day, and the amount of money we give out as construction company, the industry is kind of the same thing as here, so, but. In the future, when we do this, knowing that assessment, like you said, is part of the, hey, before you even start talking to us, know that we're gonna require for you to pay for an assessment. Then that's that's money that they know from day one that they're gonna have to spend in order to have the conversation, not to make it.
Cost of the application procedure.
Yeah.
But we haven't put this together.
Yeah.
We just, again, we committed 3,500, and so, I recommend, let's see the information come from CBE, let's see what the firm says, and then if there is, a thought that we should go forward with the extra 1,500, we could come back to the board. Does that make sense, Mr. Chairman? You okay with that?
I guess. So much spending money when.
well, part of it is just, sometimes it's worth spending money just to educate ourselves, to understand exactly what's going on, and create this kind of conversation. So I'm not against spending a little bit of it, an extra $1,500.
Yeah, and we are learning, and I am expecting other solar applications. So, what we're learning here will serve us well in the future.
Okay. Quick on delineation.
Just real quick, had a couple conversations with Steve George at Our Country Logical. I know this is a bit of a rehash from last month that the JD for lots 4 and 5 at the industrial park sits on the desk of the director down Rensselaer and Amy Gitchell. That's for some reason still sits there waiting to be signed. Steve does not see it at risk, but still participated, but did not able to predict the timeline. We do have a new contact as far as the overall jurisdictional determination, the preliminary, the hybrids, whatever you wish to refer to it as, since John Connell's retirement. His name is, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, unfortunately, but it's Adam Lavantori. And we have had to resubmit the information that was previously provided to John Connell. Again, and that was done back on January 18th because all of the works of progress that sat on John's desk evaporated, I guess. I don't know how to word it otherwise. So Steve later this week did with a meeting on another project is trying to move that forward. Or try to nudge them along to get that moving forward. But. Lots 4 and 5, it's my understanding they're moving ahead anyways.
Yep.
But that's the latest I have.
Right, you know, so then this morning.
Oh, I thought it already was.
But
it's
it's
the-
going there right now.
Oh, okay. It's the third, that's all that.
Okay. Anything else?
When's a public hearing for CB?
We don't know yet. We need cost benefit analysis, cost benefit analysis. We have some more information from them, so. Okay. Thank you all.
Be well.
Your turn.
Yeah.